So, welcome to the Customer Success Leadership Roundtable, your monthly forum for actionable insights across the customer success, support, and services space. My name is Kristi Faltorusso. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Client Success, and obviously not Andrew Marks, but filling in for him today. This is a learning series that is brought to you by Success Coaching, where they have trained over 40,000 professionals across 96 countries. So, whether you're focused on customer success, technical support, or frontline services, their programs are designed to help your team deliver exceptional customer experiences. I can confidently say that firsthand. I have worked very closely with Andrew and the team over the years. They have trained and enabled many of my organizations, and we're thrilled to have them as a partner. So you can find all the details and their offerings on their website, of course, at successcoaching.co, or in the chat. Ashley is going to be providing some links and some coupon codes that they're offering. So feel free to take advantage of that. Check it out. If you've not worked with them in the past, I definitely recommend you at least exploring what they offer. For today's topic, we are going to be talking about how do you explore and scale customer success operations. So before we jump into our topic and some introductions today, want to just make sure that we're doing some quick housekeeping for you all. So before we begin, I do want to remind you all that we are recording this session and they will be sharing the replay next week. So don't worry if for whatever reason you got to hop off. That is okay. The recording will be made available. We do ask that you please use the Q&A buttons. So at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, there should be a Q&A. You'll see them with like two little bubbles there. Please make sure that all of your questions that you would like answered are you put them in the Q&A. That's how we're going to make sure that we get to them at the end, where we do leave time at the end of our session today for live Q&A with our experts. But if your questions are not there, we cannot answer them. Now, of course, if you do drop them into the chat, Ashley will probably kindly remind you to go drop them over there so we can get to them later today. We do ask that as you get the questions in the Q&A, you take a look at some of the other questions that are there, and we ask that you upvote. So if there's something there that you really want us to make time to answer, just go give it a little thumbs up, upvote the question, and that'll make sure that we prioritize that. We will go in order of the ones that have the most upvotes. Now, for our LinkedIn Live viewers, thank you for joining us as well. We ask that you feel free to post your questions directly into the comments. We'll make sure that those are also added into the Q&A, so that way we can have them and answer them as well. So don't worry, you're not being excluded from that. We do ask that you keep the chat window for commentary only. So please obviously engage with each other. That is part of, the experience here with all of these sessions, is that they are interactive, right? We have some experts on the call today, but obviously you're all experts in your own right. So please feel free to engage in conversation, add commentary, dialogue there as well. Now, I am super excited to introduce our fantastic expert panelists who will be sharing their insights with us today. And so obviously, if you've been here before, you know the drill. We are going to start in alphabetical order. So that means that we're going to get started with introducing Dan. You're up first.
Thanks, Kristi. My name is Dan Ennis, and I'm a Director of Commercial Customer Success at Workato. I have been in customer success more broadly over a dozen years now. I just realized I hit that milestone, which is, it feels like forever in SaaS years. Been in leadership for 7 of those years, and really, when it comes to scaling, this is a topic I'm really passionate about. Through last year, I had built and led the scale customer success motion at Monday.com for 4 years. And then I moved on over to Workato to really help build and lead that same scale motion before now stepping up to lead all of US commercial customer success. So really passionate about this topic and have a lot of experience figuring out at a few different orgs, as well as more organically in some prior roles as well. So really excited to be talking about this topic with this audience today.
Wonderful, Dan. And for any of you who are not following Dan, and obviously if you're here, you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend that you go follow him on LinkedIn. He shares a lot of thought leadership and insights around scaling. So please, if you're not connected with him there, I definitely highly recommend. Now, Michael, last but not least, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kristi. Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Weil. I am the Senior Manager of Customer Success at Scale at SalesLoft. Been in the success space about a decade, started in technical support. So I've been able to luckily see both sides and all of the challenges that come with that. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about digital CS and all of the different levers you can put in place. So just really excited to be here today and have a great conversation.
Wonderful, Michael. We're thrilled to have you. And Michael, can I share with the audience that this is your debut at the roundtable?
Of course.
So guys, we want to be nice and make sure that Michael feels nice and welcome. But we're thrilled to have both of you here today and really excited about our conversation. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So let's just kick off this topic. And let's start by saying, let's face it, right? We know scaling customer success, most teams often get it wrong. We know this. We see so many people try a ton of different ways. Everyone's got a different philosophy around what that means. But too many teams think that scale means more technology, more automation, and fewer human touch points. And that the result, obviously, if that is the case, faster processes, but colder relationships. So probably not the result we're looking for. So in the race to become more efficient, we risk forgetting what made our customers stay in the first place: connection, trust, and personalized value. But what if scaling didn't have to mean sacrificing the human element? What if digital tools could actually enhance the customer experience instead of diluting it? So in today's session, we're going to be challenging the idea that scale and personalization are at odds. We're going to explore what it takes to really grow our CS operations without losing what matters most, and that's the relationships with your customers. So we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about how to scale smarter, not colder. So let's start with our first question today. So what are the biggest challenges in scaling customer success operations and how can they be addressed? Dan, let's get started with you.
Yeah, I would say really I would bucket this into three categories for the biggest challenges when it comes to how to really scale this effectively. So number one, I would say it's the temptation to value efficiency over effectiveness because we want to be able to, as we're scaling, it's really attractive to say I've automated X or I've built out something that takes Y off of our team's plate from doing that. And we therefore value efficiency over effectiveness. And to your point, Kristi, we then dilute the impact that we're actually making directly with customers. The second is actually related to the first, where it's hard to know what do you actually measure because you can't rely on some of your traditional triggers, like you mentioned, where you've got that stronger human element where you can really rely on things like sentiment, like reading the room. When you're scaling out your operations, it's a little more difficult to do that and to understand, especially when, and I know Michael can probably speak to this as well, a lot of traditional customer success leaders come from the more traditional high engagement background. So understanding how do I even measure this? Because I don't measure it the same way as our other customer success motions. And then really the third is how to scale without losing personalization. One of the things that comes up often, one of my friends, Elizabeth Italiano, she talks about it this way, where she'll describe it as we fall for fake personalization. And she talks about it from the sales context, but I think it comes up in CS as well, where when we're scaling, we try to have personalization just reference role or reference title, rather than being able to find a way to actually personalized based on what the customer needs and what they're trying to accomplish. So those would be some of the biggest challenges I see, and happy to share a little on some of the ways we've seen address that. But I know, Michael, I think you probably have some thoughts around some of the challenges as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the buckets you laid out are similar regardless of where you are. So we definitely feel those challenges at SalesLoft. I think the way that I have seen the space is this through the lens of like what's working and what isn't. Like, how do you actually hone in on that and then make an action or a decision based on those results? So that has been, I think, at the forefront of how do you scale out a scaled operation is you need to figure out, number one, based on what you're doing, what's working, what isn't, and then how do you touch as many customers as possible using your tech stack, using whatever is at your disposal. So I think that's definitely the biggest blocker when you're thinking of scaling that out.
So I got to ask you both. I have an interesting take on this, not different than either of yours, because I definitely the challenges you've outlined are spot on. But I've seen some issues pop up because leaders are so focused on activities and not the objective, right? So
Correct.
it's the task of doing something over the results that we're looking to drive. And so because they're maniacally focused on the activities, we automate and try to scale the activity. And that only does a greater disservice to the work that we're trying to do because we're getting further and further away from the goal. Is that something that either of you have seen or are also noticing in the space as we kind of go more towards the digitization of customer success?
Absolutely. And I would say in classic fashion, you've said more efficiently and elegantly what I was trying to say with like the effectiveness piece there. Like, and I think you're spot on where the distinction there effectiveness, impact, whichever word you're looking for, right? Like that's what we want to scale is we don't want to scale the input of the activity. We want to scale the outcome. We want to scale what that impact is that we're trying to do. And thinking through how we do that lets you understand where to insert digital strategies because it's not effective scaling if you have removed a meeting that your CSMs have with a customer and you automate that meeting by making it a digital touch point, but all the customers are getting a worse result because of it. Like you've actually done the opposite of scaling. You've made things worse, and that's not efficient, that's not effective. That doesn't get you the outcome you're looking for. And so when you identify what that is, scaling could also mean how do we make it easier for our CSMs to do more of this activity that does drive a high impact. And so that's where you can't really divorce the digital strategy from the human cadence of where people are involved. And I think that having that conversation in concert with each other is how you help map that from what I've seen.
Yeah, and just to take that a step further, I would say um, let your customers give you the answer to that. Like
Yep.
maybe the decision when you realize what Dan had said is like maybe you're pursuing a specific activity, put your customers in cohorts. Maybe you put everyone together who's in their first year of business with your organization. Maybe you put everyone together who is in a similar industry and then run some type of proactive motion with those cohorts and see what kind of reactive inbound you're getting from those. And I think that oftentimes illuminates the activities that your CSM should be pursuing.
I think that's a great point because one of the other challenges that I was probably going to propose to the two of you is I see teams starting to scale before they've proven what works, right? And so there's this idea of like, well, we believe this is the thing because this is the thing that we've been doing, but we still don't know for certain that the stuff that we've been focused on is even the right stuff. But now we go straight from we ignore validation and we go straight to this idea of scale. And it's like now we're amplifying bad work. And so how would you guys recommend kind of triaging that a little bit?
It's funny you mentioned amplifying bad, poor work because there's a Bill Gates quote. He talks about it in the context of software automation, but I think it's really applicable to our general processes. Where he talks about with software automation, if you automate an ineffective software process, all you're doing is amplifying the ineffectiveness. All you're doing is amplifying the poor process. And so, spot on with that. And so, I would say the challenge is you don't want to scale too early in the sense of you want to really hone in on making sure you know what's working and what good looks like for your customers with your product. And there's no replacement for being close to your customers on that. There's no replacement for talking to customers. And I know that that's not what you expect to hear, I guess, on a scale conversation like this. But if your customers are not achieving what they need to achieve, there's nothing there to scale because you don't have an effective motion already, right? So you want to hone in on that first and leaning into those customer conversations.
All right,
Yeah,
excellent points.
yeah, I was just going to say the what is good look like for each customer. That's going to give you the winning ticket every time because even in the long tail, if you can better understand everyone's use case and what good versus great looks to your customers, I think that informs your decision of how to scale next.
Well, I appreciate you guys entertaining some of the challenges that I'm getting exposure to, but I probably could follow up with like 5 other challenges. But we're gonna, for the sake of today's conversation, we're gonna keep the conversation going. So the next question we've got teed up here is how can automation be used to improve efficiency without sacrificing the quality of customer interactions? And so I think we started to dovetail on this a little bit, but be interested. Michael, why don't you kick us off on this?
Sure. Yeah. I At SalesLoft, we've actually done something pretty interesting with this use case in that we treat it as an adoption play. So we're able to use a tool that gives us health scoring and suggested actions. And we're able to automate uh, just different cohorts of customers who are surfacing specific suggested actions that indicate account health or likelihood to renewal. And we will like use our own platform. Like that's one of the benefits of doing scaled at SalesLoft is we lean heavily into our platform. So we can automate those cohorts of customers into targeted campaigns, or we call them cadences, so that those customers are receiving, you know, while it's automated, it doesn't feel as automated maybe because they're getting targeted content based on where they're not adopting. So I think on the receiving end, it is, yeah, we're not fully adopted on X part of the platform. We provide them with proactive recommendations of here's how you set it up. Here are like our best practices internally. I think all of that to say, we're targeting the right customers with the right information when they need to see it most. So that's kind of how we think of automation.
And I'd also add, looking at the internal side of automation to that, there's the customer facing side, which is what I think a lot of us focus on in the digital space, but also asking the question of what can we remove friction for our internal teams so they can do more of the things that they are best at doing. And I think that that's how we can also help use automation in some pretty creative ways to actually improve the quality of customer interactions, whether that's through the customer facing side of digital cadences like you just alluded to, Michael, and I love hearing how you'll use Sales Loft with that. I also think that internal component is massive because you're making your teams more efficient at doing the things that only they can do. And when you do that and you're allowing them to do more of that, you're also scaling through doing more with people rather than less, was the other big side of the automation coin, which again, probably a shocker here working at an iPaaS company like Workato myself. That's a very top of mind for us a lot of times is how can we automate some of that internal component, not just the external side, but the internal component so that our teams can do actually more with the customers, not less. And that's a big part of the operations side of scaling our customer success operations. It's not just scaling things that are on the external facing, but scaling internally as well.
I love that. Okay, so one thing that isn't mentioned here that I'm inclined to bring up is the role of data when it comes to automation. I feel very strongly that a lot of companies are operating with poor data. And unfortunately, when we think about scale, it's going to amplify some of that. In order to automate anything, like what is your point of view on what to do and how to navigate the data that you have access to, understanding that it might be partial, it might be incorrect, it might not be current. So what do you guys think about the role of data in its ability to support automation in order for this process to be more effective?
Yeah, I mean, the data can be a wrench a lot of times. Like you have to have confidence in the data. You have to have some type of mechanism to ensure that the contacts you have are still relevant and they're still at those accounts. So I think, yeah, if you don't, it all comes back to data. Like if you don't have the right data, the automation not only isn't going to work, but it's not going to help move the needle. So I think, you know, making a concerted effort to have more frequent like engagement points to ask those questions directly of like who are the best people to contact, who are the decision makers, who are the admins that are in the platform day to day, so that you can kind of take a data hygiene approach more proactively. But it is it's definitely a challenge. I won't lie and say it's a breeze.
Okay, well, then I got to ask, Dan, because we talked about efficiency, internal efficiency also. Is there anything we can do to drive more efficiency and maybe even automation to help manage and maintain data accuracy?
Yeah, I would say there are plenty of tools is I think a big one there. You want to look at the tooling to help. How can you reduce friction on the internal data hygiene? And I use that phrase reducing friction because that's one of the points. Nobody enjoys going in and updating whatever your CRM is that you're using. That's not like nobody looks forward to that part of the job. Or if you do, you'd be the first. And maybe I would love to hear from you separately. That's a whole other conversation. So, how can you use tools and automation to reduce friction from that? Whether it's looking at plugins between your call recording software, if you have an external call recording software that also is able to integrate with your CRM in a way that auto populates some of the data and who's attending, whether that's calls or what's needed there. And I think that leveraging the automation component is huge. And at the same time, my kind of sort of different point of view. I think it's very similar to what you're saying there, Michael, about the importance of data. But I would also go the step further of saying on data, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because oftentimes the lack of like perfectly clean data, we let stop us from beginning. We let stop
Yeah.
us from starting with what we have and understanding we sometimes will treat poor data as a fixed state rather than a great, how do I take what I have and what can I build on that? Or what do I need to get data for? Or how do I need to track this to know that this outcome is working? And starting with that perspective as opposed to just, well, this is the data we have and I've got to clean it up. Even though you can't get around that piece, I would say going that step further on taking a proactive approach to it and starting with what you have.
I love that. And thanks for entertaining my extra questions there. Clearly, I've got some data concerns that I wanted addressed, but thank you for that, Dan. All right, let's shift gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk about what are the most effective digital-led strategies for managing a growing customer base, right? And I think that there is a different nuance here because I think folks are always trying to figure out, well, how do I go from a current install base of customers that we have, these legacy customers who have always had human interaction, to then pivoting and transitioning them to something that is more digitally led? But then you've also got this like, well, we've got customers who are coming in and now we're not even giving them the experience of this human engagement and we're going straight to that digital led strategy. So how do you think about some of the most effective ways to do this when you've got such a growing and evolving customer base?
Yeah, I alluded to this before, but we are lucky in that we're able to go really hard with our software and our platform for this. We have a very large book in the scaled space, and I think it was helpful for us in the beginning to divvy our customers up into cohorts. So like, are they a new customer? Are they in their first year with us? Are they a legacy customer, like you said, Kristi? Each of those buckets of customers are likely going to require different kinds of information. New customers, it's going to be really training heavy. It's going to be really like product update heavy. Whereas a nurture customer, it's maybe like training a new admin or making sure that they know of other product updates that are coming through. Whereas a legacy customer, it's just making them feel supported, sharing a lot of the same collateral with them that you would the other cohorts, but giving them that open line of, hey, we're checking in every so often. They can reach out to us reactively. But I think in conjunction with using our cadences and breaking our book of business into cohorts, it allows us to be as targeted as possible with the information and the content that we're sending that we've identified as what these types of customers will want to see, number one, and number two are just going to be asking us for anyways. So it ultimately lessens our inbound and allows us to be more proactive in the process.
Love that. Dan, what are your thoughts on how do we kick off with these digital-led strategies?
Yeah, it starts with, to go back to one of the things we said at the beginning, and not to be a bit of a broken record, but we have to know what good looks like. If you don't know how to start your customers off well, when you have heavy human involvement, what's most important, whether that's even simple things like how do you distinguish between implementing versus onboarding, things like how do you get the team set up for long-term success. If you don't know what that looks like when your people are heavily involved, you are not going to have a effective digital version of that. So it starts with really knowing what good looks like, because I have found, and maybe this has just been my experience, a lot of times a digital onboarding experience hasn't been fantastic because the company doesn't have a fantastic, even human-led onboarding experience. And so
Valid.
what was that?
I said very valid,
And
valid.
so I think that if you really nail that, what does good look like? What do these customers need to know? What do they have to do? Then you can take an approach of leading with digital there, whether that's cohorted onboardings, one-to-many sessions, bringing people together to answer questions in an onboarding session where it's not totally digital, but it's at least scaled one-to-many, focusing on things like giving customers the next best step to take in onboarding, I think is a really big one in a digital perspective, not giving them the big onboarding checklist where a customer's eyes will glaze over and they'll want to check out. But from a digital perspective, sharing this is the next action to take, going a step further, having that next action to take living initially in product, being a good step there, differentiating your digital experience between new account growing onboarding versus just new user onboarding
Yep.
so that you can scale that out effectively. There's a lot of different components that go into it that you'll want to make sure you are able to answer, like I said, at the what does good look like period level. And then you can do that digitally. And there's a lot of creative ways depending on your customer base. Is your customer base not typically tech heavy? Do you use a texting platform? I know people who work with the construction industry, for example, they have a SaaS platform, and in-app is not the way they communicate with their people digitally. They leverage text platforms to be able to text them. So thinking through what does it look like to bring it to where they want and being creative with what digital looks like. So I know I shared a lot of ideas there, but I think it's because we tend to put it in this small box of what it can look like, when in reality, there's a lot of options for how we can do that.
Okay, so I have like the weakest add-on here because I am not the expert here, but I think it still warrants some airtime. One of the best strategies that I have found when we're doing anything digital is setting expectations and having these conversations in the sales process and educating your prospects about what the engagement will look like. And then making sure that you're continuing to set expectations along the way, right? I feel like there is this idea that customers can sometimes even panic, right? Even as they're evaluating software, that like, what do you mean I don't have a designated person? What do you mean that I have to go through this all on my own, right? There is this fear, there is change to your point, Dan. There's the technical aptitude that some may or may not have depending on the persona. So one of the best strategies I found is this expectation setting and this enablement on what their experience will look like that continuously happens at every stage in the journey. So, like I said, it was a weak contribution, but I think a very valid one. So I'll let you two validate whether or not that deserved the time I took.
As usual, yes.
I just will say that, I couldn't agree more, and that it almost feels like the biggest mandate we have as a scale team is to like shout about all of these resources available to our customers early and often. We have it in all of our templates, we have it in our email signatures. It's like if there's a place where we're not talking about resources that are available to our book, we need to like go change it and add it there. Part of our proactive motion is reaching out to our customers and letting them know, here's what you're going to expect a month from now, 3 months from now. We'll send you a configuration check in 6 months. So we try and make a concerted effort to, like, from the top, whether they're coming into our book having a named CSM or they're just starting at SalesLoft, we want to really make sure, one, they know how to engage with our team, and two, they know what resources are available to them if they really want those quick answers. So like we have daily office hours. There are just a ton of ways that our customers can interact with us, rather than just sending in an email and waiting for however long it may take to get back.
I love that. I will say the only other tactical thing that I add there is like we have a panic button experience, meaning that regardless of what journey or experience you're designing for your customers, giving them the option of connecting with somebody, right? I think that there is just some value to that of like I'm stuck, I need help, please somebody, because I think the worst experience is, I know that I've had this, is like getting stuck with like a chat bot and I have a conversation with myself for 8 hours. Thank you very much, Best Buy. So like, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Like, I know that we don't want to overly index on human in certain situations, but like, what are your takes?
No, and I think that not only is that helpful for the times it's actually needed, to the point of expectation setting and getting customers comfortable, I have found that even just having that option gives people confidence in the digital engagement model.
Yeah.
If they know if I need it, I will be able to get a hold of someone, suddenly they're not anxious about the process. They're significantly less anxious and are more willing to engage with our digital led motion. And so we do the same thing. There's a way for them to get a hold of someone. There's a way for them to actually connect with a member of the team. And again, I know that flies in the face of like traditional scaling and AI and all the things, but having the option there when people are tired of always talking to only bots or only these other things, knowing they've got the break glass in case of emergency option makes them feel comfortable. And then they're willing to engage with the rest of the process.
Totally agree. Okay, great. So thank you for validating my tactical, my tactical answer there. All right, so let's shift gears again. We're going to talk about segmentation because obviously this plays a big part in how people even think about whether or not they want to introduce a digital strategy, right? Or how they're approaching scale. So how can segmentation help in delivering these personalized experiences at scale?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, if scale and digital are often described as right content to the right audience at the right time in the right channel, segmentation helps you define how do you know that? How do you know who is the right person? How do I know what is the right time? How do I know what is the right channel? And the challenge a lot of times with why our segmentation hasn't necessarily worked the way we want it to when it comes to making an effective scale or digital strategy is for most of us, and stop me if you've heard this one before, segmentation means we draw ARR lines where we're willing to invest more people on. And yes, that's a version of segmentation. And there's a reality that we have to acknowledge that we can't invest the same amount in a customer that's one of our top 10 customers of people, human time involved in the same amount for a top 10 customer versus one of our long tail. Yes, that's a business reality. Yet, that kind of segmentation doesn't result in an effective digital strategy. I would say segmentation should be around what do the customers have in common that they need to be able to be successful so that we can find that they are able to engage with a digital strategy. One example that we've had, I recall in a prior role, we redid our segmentation to include a component of customer maturity. And the more mature a customer was, we actually reduced the level of human engagement, even if they were a slightly higher spend customer, because they didn't need it as much. They were
Mhm.
successful. They were, let's call it a company that we knew based on like the axes of size to licenses to all those things were at 90% of the growth that they were going to get from that perspective. They were healthy. They'd been with us for a while. We don't need to engage with them the same way because they don't necessarily even want that. They still have the break glass in case of emergency option, but we included a maturity aspect. I've seen some companies that base the segmentation off of industry because they know that different industries will want to engage in different ways. So the way that I would say it is segmentation allows you to effectively answer the right person, right content, right channel at the right time in a way that actually is about what your customers need, not about your arbitrary, candidly, right? Your arbitrary internal ARR lines that you draw. Though, yes, obviously the asterisk of you have to acknowledge that in the business reality of it. I totally understand that.
Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. We've tried to segment based on really anything we can glean from inbound from our customers. So that's part of where we did like new customer, nurture customer, maybe like at risk, and we'll treat those different. Maybe that is a scenario where it's one-to-one uh, appropriate. And then I think we also just look at it through, and Dan, you mentioned this, but really through like a product adoption standpoint. So that for us feels like the biggest way in which we can move the needle. So if your team is not at benchmark for X part of the platform, great. We have all of these resources that we're going to proactively send you. We're going to make it as easy as possible. There's video walkthroughs. So I think, really lean into how can we best get our customers to adopt the platform, but beyond that, like make it as sticky as possible. So we really just look at our cohorts in that way.
I love that. Okay, so I got to ask, we're going to be a little provocative here because I know this is about scale. And so, like, adding more people doesn't really make sense for this philosophically, but customers should have options, right? So, even when you have this scaled model, what is your take on offering them an experience where they can have designated resources if they pay for them, right? Or something like that, an alternative. If they really cannot be successful in the motion that you're providing, do you give them options? Is that a pathway to their success? Because if we think about, Dan, you call this out beautifully, and I appreciate that, but I am very against segmentation based exclusively on ARR. It means nothing about your customers. You're not providing them an experience based on who they are or where they are. It's an internal factor that means nothing. And when we design experiences there, they're just going to fail. So, but right, you can't over index in the investments you're making in smaller companies, right? That the economics aren't there. So how do you augment optionality for them so that you can give them an option if this is like, Kristi, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. Your digital thing is cool, but it's not for me. Like, what are some other options there that can still scale, but maybe it's not just putting them into an automated experience or a digital led experience?
Absolutely. And I would say my perspective on this, it's funny, I think tends to land on this is where services can come in really handy. I think services, partners, all these ways that we can do to have someone pay to help get to that, because to your point, I think that's really valid. I, generally speaking, not as a hard fast rule, generally speaking, I am relatively opposed to paying ongoing ARR for access to a CSM, for example, because my framing is like our customer success strategy is how we make you successful. It's not the thing you're paying extra for.
Right.
We've got services. We're happy to like say if you need extra help, we've got ways to help you that you can pay for. We've got plenty of avenues for that. But we really try to guard the like in a positive way that the CSM and the customer success org, you customer, this isn't something you're paying extra for. This is what we are doing to help make you successful. And our commitment to you as a business is this team, this org. And so that's kind of my general take to it. Obviously, like that can look different for different orgs, but in general, there should absolutely be options for people to pay to remove that friction if they're not able to be successful there.
Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would agree. We're certainly not going to turn anyone away from scoping out a paid engagement. And we do that a lot, actually. I think the problem becomes, and Dan, this is essentially what you're saying, is the friction that comes from having to need to do that. Whereas the question then becomes like, well, what's available to me that I don't have to pay more for? That should just be baked into like my agreement with your platform. So it's a lot of targeted webinars that are like a one-to-many model where it's kind of like a training session, but maybe it's focused on a specific part of the platform. That's kind of where we're leaning in because you're able to make just a tremendous impact with a couple of people leading a session. So I think that's something that we have found to be very helpful. But yeah, we're not turning anyone away to working with our consulting team.
All right, very good. Okay, so what role do you guys think the customer journey mapping plays in identifying opportunities for where we can introduce scaling operations?
I think it helps you provide a clear like delineation and visual representation, if nothing else, of where you've got opportunities to automate, where you've got opportunities to digitize. But the big asterisk I put on that is, I know it just sounds like I'm calling out all our businesses on this one, but I feel like most of the time our journey maps aren't actually an outside in, what's the journey the customer goes through. Most of our journey maps, at least in my experience, and maybe I'm just speaking from myself, is actually more of an activity log. It's more of a list of the activities that we're doing. To your initial point at the very top of this conversation, Kristi, we focus on the activities. It's more about here's what we are doing at these points. Which of these things we're doing can we automate? Rather than a journey of assuming we landed the right customer, what do they want to experience as they are going through their first year with our product? What do they want to feel 90 days in? How will they know that they've achieved that? And from there, when we've landed with that outside in approach to journey mapping, what is their actual journey? What is their experience? Then we can effectively bring in, where do we automate? Where do we digitize? Where do they maybe even prefer something digital? Like maybe they prefer getting something as simple as once they've hit some initial milestone, getting an automated email that says, you've done X, congratulations, great job. Like those kinds of things that are actually adding to your processes with a digital component and without removing something. So I think that They're really helpful, but only if your journey map isn't an activity timeline. If your journey map is truly outside in, then it can be really beneficial to map where on there a customer would want automation or digital engagement.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. And so, Michael, I've got a question for you that kind of takes this to the next level, which is now you've got this kind of augmented state, right? We've got this digital engagement along the journey. But now, how do you balance that with human led engagement, right? Especially as we think about high engagement accounts. And I will not use the word high touch, but high engagement customers, how do we think about a balance of both, right? And how do they work harmoniously together? Because I've also heard from a ton of people that, like, oh, well, I have these large enterprise customers and no way am I going to give them a digital experience, or no way is it going to be a scaled experience. Everything has to feel white glove and bespoke. But I actually don't feel like that's the case, right? Like, not every single thing in the journey needs to be human led. So how do you think about striking the right balance?
Yeah, and it's hard. Like I think all of us on this call right now would agree that, if anyone had figured it out, we probably wouldn't be here. So we're constantly asking these questions, trying to figure it out. It's hard not to like get into the segmentation topic when thinking about like what can be human led versus otherwise. So I think, when you have a really lean scaled team, you have to take that into account of, maybe the higher ARR customers in your book need some more hands-on, approach or engagement with their CSM, which is totally valid. And I think in an ideal world, we would have that, be an exclusive type of engagement with our customers. How do we balance it? I think it is a combination of, and Dan has said this a couple times today, but figuring out by cohort what good looks like and understanding like what success looks like to the customers in your book based on, what kind of profile they have. And then taking it a step further from there, it is how do you provide that human touch, but maybe it's not a one-on-one engagement. Maybe it is a targeted webinar that's led by scaled CSMs along with, a customer education specialist if you have that group at your organization. Another thing that I think is really worthwhile is setting up customer roundtables to talk with each other, to have them and almost, I don't want this to sound cliche, but empower your scaled customers to share what's worked, what hasn't worked. Sure, we're the experts, but I think when you're in a platform and you've configured it and you're working in it and you're, whether you're a frontline manager or higher up, those types of engagements, like a customer roundtable discussion group, like an exclusive roundtable, those feedback we've gotten is those have been extremely worthwhile and impactful. So I think that's an area where we're figuring out how to stick the landing on those.
I think you hit on something that's really important. So one of the things that I always say is, like, people, regardless, customers or employees, whomever, right? People want change to happen with them, not to them, right? So if you are designing for your customers, with your customers, you're likely to have a better experience overall because you're understanding where they're coming from and you're designing the appropriate motions. Now, listen, I also think that people are generally, I'll say generally, not unreasonable, and also understand the reason why we're doing these things, right? We are businesses working with other businesses. And so everyone is trying to figure out, how do we drive more efficiency? How can we be more effective? So I think leading with a business mindset in partnership with your customers, I think you could figure out a really great way to deliver that and a balance that makes sense for both parties. All right, Dan, I want to know how we're measuring this now, because we have talked about a lot of things here. And at the end of the day, this is all well and good, but we need to understand if any of what we're doing or talking about is going to have the impact that we need it to. So when you think about measurement of all of this, what are the metrics that you think leaders should be tracking to evaluate, is this working, right? Are the scaled operations and this personalization approach, is it working for us?
Yeah, so it goes back to the beginning of we want to focus on impact and outcomes, not just activities. So you want to focus on two broad sets of things to measure, and then I'll give examples of each. But the two broad sets are, number one, the outcome measures, the actual things you're trying to achieve, product adoption, retention rate, more advocates, all the actual things you're trying to actually achieve. And the second is thinking a little bit more like a performance marketer, which are the actual performance metrics. Things like, are people opening and clicking through and engaging with the various digital cadences that we have? Because that will help you understand where you actually need to iterate and make improvements. For example, if you're running digital plays with your customers and you're not seeing the outcomes you want to understand, are they opening the emails and clicking the links that you're sending them, but not actually doing more in the product? Okay, so that means that you're effective at engaging them, but you're not actually effective at driving behavior change. So you want to actually change that. If you are sending cadences and they're not even opening or clicking through, then you'll want to actually figure out, how do I actually, maybe I'm targeting the wrong person. Maybe I am having an ineffective subject line, whatever that looks like. I'm putting it in the wrong place in the platform. All of those kinds of components will help you understand, where do you actually want to iterate, so that you can then track downstream to what's effectively reaching the customers, and then, is that effectively driving those outcomes? So the downstream things you're measuring, very similar to all of traditional customer success, because you're still working towards those same outcomes. To Kristi's point, if you have really effective and engaging things that people are opening and clicking through, but your adoption goes off a cliff, that's not effective. So you want to measure both sides of it so that you can make sure you are really being effective with these scale and digital led components.
All right, Michael, is there anything that you're tracking to measure this that Dan hasn't hit on?
So, I mean, the only thing I was going to say, because pretty much everything Dan said is I'm on board with. But Dan, you mentioned behavior changes, which is like the big thing for us using our one of our success tools and looking at engagement buckets. So if we are looking at, say, like a very low engaged account, we're going to check back after a certain amount of time to see if the behavior changed based on the content that we sent them, causing them to move up to like a medium or a high level of engagement. So that's another area that we use to see, like, one is the content helping to move the needle, but two, are these customers actually taking the next step and doing the suggested next actions that we're surfacing to them.
Love
Okay,
that.
so now I have a question for the both of you now, because you both hit on something that I actually posted about on LinkedIn earlier this week. But you talked about marketing metrics. Are either of you or both of you working with your marketing teams to design these programs, or are you guys doing it by yourselves? Because if I was designing this, I would be 100% piggybacking off of all of the expertise that happens in the marketing organization, because what they're doing with prospects, right? How much of that can be overlapped and thought about in how we apply those same strategies, motions, and measurements to the install base?
Short answer is absolutely. I would say that none of this is things that should be done in a silo, whether it's with marketing to piggyback off of content, positioning, ensure that maybe that they're actually already doing something, that we can focus our efforts elsewhere, but not just marketing. I would even go as far as to say product, because
Yeah.
a lot of times I've found that our digital CS strategies are effectively a band-aid for what are long-term actual product challenges. And so the best digital customer success strategy is actually improving your product, improving that to be more efficient. So you want to work hand in hand with your product team, not any other team on its own. Like, you want to be engaging with sales, you want to be engaging with marketing, with product, to make sure that you're all working together to pool your efforts for stronger outcomes.
I love that. Michael, what are your thoughts on this cross-functional collaboration? And who's your favorite team to partner with?
Uh, Partner with so many different teams, including marketing. It's so hard to choose. I Luckily we have, a really big village of teams internally that just help with this scaled offering. So we're working with uh, product marketing, customer marketing. There's so much of figuring out like swim lanes and where there's overlap and where we can become more efficient. And we have like a customer education and program experience team as well. So they're very baked into the creation of webinars or those roundtables that I mentioned. So I luckily have a big group helping us with all these initiatives.
All right, I love that. And you were very political and not picking a favorite. So good for
Yeah, I
you.
can't do it. Can't
I
pick it.
definitely probably would have and then started some internal battles. Okay. All right. So that said, listen, we could probably continue on with our own questions for another 3 hours here. But why don't we shift gears and we're going to open it up to answer some of the questions that are coming from our attendees. So for everyone who is still here with us, thank you guys so much for continuing to gift us with your time. It's not lost on us how valuable that is. So we appreciate you hanging on for this conversation. Hopefully you're finding value in the insights that our experts are sharing, but we want to make sure that we're getting to your questions as well. So if you have not taken a moment to hop over to the Q&A, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and do that, and not just to submit your questions, but please head over there and upvote questions that you want answered, right? There are some really great ones in here, and I want to make sure that we're prioritizing the ones that are most interesting to you all. So you still have plenty of time. Just a friendly reminder that we do run a quarter past, so we are not stopping in 7 minutes. I won't do the math of 15 plus 7. So we're just going to say that we've got a little time. We're going to get to as many questions as we can. And I'll get us started with the one that we've got upvoted right now. I'm hitting a little refresh button. Here we go. Okay, here we go. All right. So first question is from Corin. So what kinds of programs and resources are you building to support this scale experience? We're building webinars, newsletters, value reports, office hours, but want to ensure that we're exploring all of the mechanisms to deliver value effectively once we establish segmentation.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on
Yeah.
that one. Something really cool that we're doing, we're using a tool called Ever After. And I know, Dan, you had alluded to like checklists maybe being a little clunky, which I do agree with. However, it's proven to be this really cool like digital CSM experience where a customer can go through like this digital kit where you can configure certain parts of the platform. When you click on it, it takes you into the UI, so it's all very streamlined in that sense. But that to me, in addition to the webinars, newsletters, office hours, which we also have, that has felt like the biggest scenario where a customer feels like they're maybe about to ring the panic alarm. Like that feels like, they have a human on the other side who's taking care of them, holding their hand. So really much leaning into like the AI digital automation space to be able to offer scaled customers just a little bit more white glove support.
And it's funny you mentioned that Ever After is actually where I got the next best action from.
Nice.
Like they were kind of the ones who helped kind of really frame that as opposed to the full checklist at once. Because I totally agree. I love that.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, hopefully, Corin, that answers your question. So our next question up is from Wade. So who, department-wise, such as marketing, product, customer success, owns keeping customer-facing material up to date with product changes? It's a challenge keeping material up to date with continually evolving tech.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. I would say I'm going to give you two answers. One's the ideal answer, and the one's the realistic answer. Ideally, lives within product because they're making the product changes. That team would best be having somebody on their team. They're not needing to communicate to another team to then go take these steps to keep something up to date. Living with the team that's actually rolling out all of those changes would be the ideal world. Answer, I would say, to who can do that. But your question about who owns it, the realistic answer is someone. Like someone just has to own that they are committing to doing that. What doesn't work is the hot potato between multiple teams saying, great, everybody update your stuff as you have time, because then it just falls by the wayside.
Never. Yeah.
So the ideal world answer is I have found most effective with product, both because less things get missed. It reduces lead time between an update in product and something being updated if they're committing to owning that. And then again, very similar, which would be the realistic answer though, is if it's not product, just have somebody. You need to have a team. Is it your CS team? Is it your marketing team? As long as somebody's doing it, it's better than again, just ad hoc doing things as you see.
Totally agree there, Dan. I'm going to add, like, these are the types of programs or projects, rather, that if you have a somebody who is extremely ambitious, who is seeking promotion and growth, like these are the types of like standout projects that you can offer to the team to get them to own, right? So I always look for opportunities to give people some sense of ownership, something that they could be a part of that may be outside of the scope of work they're doing, especially if they are somebody who is interested in growing in the organization. These are great types of projects and programs I put in front of them as like a buffet and say, hey, like these are things that need ownership, and see who kind of raises their hand and rises to the occasion. So it's easy if you've got a team or somebody who can do it, but if not, it's also a great opportunity for folks. All right, let's get to our next question here. So this one's from Anonymous. So we conduct live onboarding training and won't be changing that. But what are some ways that we can augment our live training with digital motions? Should we try triggering digital content based on usage data points? Question mark.
Some of the things I've seen be effective there are, so I agree, you don't necessarily have to remove live sessions to also then make it more effective digitally. I gave one example. So whether that's as they hit milestones, celebrating that digitally, whether that's an email, whether that's in product, also triggering on if you have the data, which hopefully you do, to see are they actually taking the actions you've been telling them about in your onboarding sessions. So being able to engage with them digitally on if they're not taking those steps and following up, ideally in product, but also over email, that would also work. And so I would say those are some really helpful ways to augment with digital, as well as following up your live sessions, and sometimes with a lag, even not even immediate, like with a digital reminder of some of those things I've also seen be effective, because chances are someone's going through, they're attending whatever your session is, and they didn't necessarily block time right after to take whatever actions you've just trained them on or helped walk them through. They have their next meeting they're jumping into because that's the world we live in. So sending a reminder that's actually with an intentional delay can also help keep that momentum going, I've seen.
Michael, any additional thoughts on that one?
Only thing I would add is intentional delay is SalesLoft cadences. So that is how we are following up after those live trainings with targeted content. So yeah, that's kind of how we manifest that part.
Okay, well, Michael, while I have you, the next question is all yours. So Danny asked, and specifically for you, our org actually has SalesLoft, and the challenge the CS team has had adopting it is that the cadences are often time-based versus usage action-based on the user data. How do you connect software usage to SalesLoft cadences?
So I have some questions for Danny as a first step, because I would be curious if Danny, if your email steps are automated, if they're manual, because I think that would make a big difference. If they're manual steps, then you're able to have just a higher level of personalization. So you could like dig into a specific account and identify maybe where there is, are usage issues, and you can then like automate them into a different cadence that's more, still not time-based, but hitting that usage data point. So I think there are a lot of different ways. Definitely email us because I feel like this is a good opportunity to dig in. Um, but yeah, as long as your email steps and the cadence aren't automated, then you can kind of treat that as a general choose your own invention, choose your own adventure format. But yes, please reach out, Danny. Happy to chat about that.
All right. Well, Danny has another question. So we're going to answer Danny's part two. So
Okay.
he also had asked, when separating cohorts, would you do that at a user level or at the team level? So teams can be 3 years in while users can be 3 months in. How do you balance the different cohort with one team? That's a great
This
question.
is such a great question. The way we do it is on the team level, but that being said, it begs the question of how do you account for the end users within that account? And I think what we've oftentimes recommended to customers when we're able to uh, be on a one-to-one meeting with them is kind of proposing this gatekeeper profile between SalesLoft and their organization, where you can create like an onboarding cadence or like a new user cadence in SalesLoft so that you're essentially treating them differently within that nurture cohort, and they're getting the platform training that they need. But it is difficult when you're, say you're treating an account as a legacy account, but there are new users within that account. So it's a fine line, but I think if you have a point person at your organization who can serve as that gatekeeper with resources and training, it does solve for that.
And I also think it depends on the nature of your product. Like how tailored will that individual new end user's experience need to be? For example, are they expected to go in and be building? Are they going to be consuming? Are they going to be just viewing something? And so your answer to that question would look different. You can have a very boilerplate, for example, if main new users outside of that gatekeeper champion fill in the blank role that Michael just described are primarily just going to be passively engaging, but they need to be in. You can have a pretty boilerplate standard digital way to get them up to speed on it. But if it's going to need to be a more bespoke experience where you're expecting them to go in and take a lot more actions, having something that trains them that's paired with that owner that Michael was describing is absolutely crucial.
Very good. Okay, so you guys know what the cool thing is about stepping in and managing this for Andrew is that I'm going to ask my own question because I can. So, I have a question for you both. What what process or program in the life cycle should people start with when they think about scale? And I'm going to lead the witness a little bit here. So, I see a lot of teams want to start with onboarding because it's process oriented and it feels like an easy place to start. Now, I would say that's absolutely not the best place to start because it's the most impactful and almost the most important part of the journey. So, why would I risk that to start with if I'm building out my scaled program? So, I would almost try to automate or scale almost anything before onboarding. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I saw Michael waiting on mute, so I'll jump in. So I think I would agree with that. That's why I alluded earlier to if you try to scale your onboarding before you've really nailed onboarding. I think that's kind of what I was getting at a little bit earlier. Was I agree that that's where a lot of people jump in. I would say you want to balance kind of risk with reward on that. So to your point, if you're able to scale onboarding super effectively and make it digital, great. That's really high reward, but there's a lot of risk in doing that wrong, to your point, right? And so I would say if you are just starting, map out like where there is, and I know that this sounds playing it safe, but like where there's relatively low risk to try bringing something in. If you find that your CSM teams, for example, are spending an inordinate amount of time on answering relatively basic questions for their customers, stand up in office hours. That takes very little input to set up, and you've got an outlet for your team so that your CSMs are focused on driving real strategic value, not answering basic questions. That's just one example, right? So look at the amount of like effort. I don't want to be overly prescriptive on saying this is the thing to start with. Office hours is a good go-to in my mind because it's relatively product agnostic and most products benefit from something like that. But I would say think through that balance of risk, reward, effort when looking where to start as you're trying to make sure that you're starting in the right place.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I was gonna say office hours as a good option as well, just because our customers love that and just enjoy the offering. Um, so yeah, I think if you can start that sooner rather than later, it's only going to set your customers up for success earlier on.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you letting me jump in line here with my own question. Okay, let's get back to the drawing board because we got folks who have added more questions for us here. So I'm just going to refresh to see if we've been upvoting. Nope. So if you guys are still with us, which many of you are, please head over to the questions. You can either drop them in or you can go and upvote on some. We still have about 9 minutes left. So we're going to see how many we can get to. So Katie asked, for new customers, at what point and how is CS being brought in to set proper expectations? Is it during sales? Is it post sales? Is it when adoption begins? When do you guys think it's appropriate to do that?
For us, it's right after onboarding. So post sales after onboarding, we are introed and kind of set the scene with here's what to expect from us over the next month, 3 months, 6 months. So that's kind of where we come into play.
We go earlier. For us, it's at the very beginning, even during onboarding, and the engagement model is introduced in the pre-sales process, to the point there, I think, in the question behind the question a little bit. So we do introduce that in the pre-sales process, and sometimes it's sales who does that as part of the engagement there. Sometimes we actually even do bring in CS into pre-sales because it can be beneficial to help get that conversation going, begin building the groundwork for the partnership long term, even in the pre-sales process. So for us, we tend to go early because even during onboarding, we've seen value from the CS team, the CS org, the overall engagement model being a part of that.
All right, very good. Thanks, guys. On to our next question. What are your thoughts on scaling CS digitally with a sole CSM? How do you make that manageable and able to scale once the team grows?
I mean, how many customers are in that book? I guess is my first question.
I mean, I'm sure we could say that there's probably a lot of
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of
Yeah, there's all the follow.
questions.
Exactly. I was like, there's a million questions I would dig in if I was sitting
Listen,
down over
I mean, I don't think
coffee.
anyone here actually feels comfortable answering a question without asking 5 questions first.
100%.
But
And so
we are going to fill in the blanks. We're going to do little Mad Libs here and just insert data that you want to there for the sake of answering. So we'll say 200 customers right now. It's one CSM. They are very overwhelmed. How do we manage this right now?
Yeah, I would say some of it's a strategy we've already talked about. Are you having a repetitious, for example, types of common meetings with your customers that you can then say, I'm going to stand up my own internal office hours as a sole CSM, rather than take out of the 200 customers, I'm going to have 50 meetings this month. Oh my gosh, like on this one topic, I can just bring 50 of my customers to this one meeting, right? So standing up your own office hours, I think, is a really helpful way to do that. Focusing on the internal side of efficiency, like I mentioned earlier, I think looking at what are you spending a lot of time doing. Sometimes it can be hard to take that step back when you're in the thick of being the sole CSM for a lot of accounts. Totally understand. But if you can take that step back to look at and say, what am I spending the most time on? So that you can understand, can I reduce the amount of time I'm spending on this while achieving the same outcome? Not, again, just looking to automate an activity, but really taking that step back to understand what you can reduce friction points on for yourself. How can you group customers? What are you doing in meetings that could be emails? Where are you not being proactive? Because oftentimes you get stuck in on the treadmill of, you've gotten into reactive mode with a large number of customers, then you're stuck on the treadmill of reactivity because you're never getting out of it to go proactive. So really thinking through those questions will help you understand, I think, where you can scale even as a sole CSM.
Yeah, and it's like when you identify what those similarities are with customers that one CSM is over, it's like, where can you use AI in that? I would imagine there are a lot of AI solutions that you could use in the short term before you get into the scaling motion. So I would think that would be some low-hanging fruit to make those customers feel, one, supported, but two, get them the answers that they're looking for.
All right, very good. Well, I think time permits. Let's see if we can get to 1 or 2 more questions here. All right, next one that we've got here is, do you have experience with companies that provide customers full solutions, products, software, services across many different domains or types? If so, does CS focus in on a specific area or cover everything? I'm thinking like Adobe vibes with this one.
That's kind of
Like
what I was
multiple
thinking.
products, different use cases that are sold to different parts of the organization.
Correct.
That's immediately the narrative I just wrote in my head, but I could be so far off. So, Katie, if you're still with us, Katie, and you want to go to the chat and clarify anything for us there, but that's kind of what I'm envisioning with the way that this question is structured.
Just giving it a second to see if
We're gonna give I'm gonna scroll to see if Katie is still here, and if not, we're gonna go on to our next question. Oh, nope, Katie is still with us. Let me give Katie a second. Okay, thank you, Katie. I work for an industrial automation and energy management company. Okay. Did that help you guys?
A little, I don't have that breadth of experience. I want to be transparent. Like I want to be honest, like with that. While I appreciate that we've been positioned as, appreciate that, Katie. Well, I appreciate us being positioned as the experts. I also never want to like overextend and give, just candidly speak to a situation that I have little experience in outside the software product space.
Same.
Okay, that makes three. Sorry, Katie, can't help you. Um, I wanted to so badly.
100%. I was hoping it was the Adobe case because I can speak to that
I was
from
like, so can
Monday.
I. I was like,
I was
listen,
like, oh
you can
yeah,
just
I can
rip
do
off
that
how
one.
Salesforce, Adobe, Oracle, all these companies that have been
Yeah,
doing
I
it.
was gonna say that I can talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Katie. Maybe we take that offline. But if anyone who is still with us, or if you're listening to the replay of this, maybe you follow up and just help a friend out. All right, guys, we're gonna go on to the next question. Going back to our expectation setting. How do you all get cross-functional buy-in to be telling the same consistent story?
Very easily. I think the digital space is and has been framed as like a company-wide team pretty much. Like everyone has some role in this space just by the nature of the beast and how high of a volume of accounts are in our book. So I think, other parts of the business kind of look to us to set what that vibe is and what that story is. And so I think working in the scaled space allows you to not only develop that talk track, but also, um, cascade it to the rest of the company. And we know best, right? So I think that really does help align and kind of keep everything be a united front in terms of what we're communicating to our customers with expectations. Dan mentioned this before. They could start, even though we're not introduced until after onboarding, it's like that information can already begin to be shared in the pre-sales process. So I think it starts in the scaled space, and then everyone, from my experience, has jumped on board, and buy-in has not been difficult. So
I'd
Dan?
add on my end, yeah, I would add, it has been more difficult. So I'll share that. So I have experience. There has been some friction sometimes, and I would say over communicate is like you cannot over communicate enough. Like just however much you think you need to communicate, do it again for your cross-functional teams. I think validating concerns, giving listening spaces for those teams, especially if this is new and you're rolling out a more digital motion compared to a more traditional customer success motion, there will be a lot of concerns from teams. Are our customers going to have degraded experience? So really candidly not downplaying that, because when people, just like your internal counterparts, just like with a customer, if we downplay like their concerns rather than give space to validate that, over communicate, provide feedback mechanisms, all of that I've found is really effective in winning people over to get a consistent message rather than try to get around it.
All right, excellent. Well, guys, that brings us to time, and I think we're ending just on time. So we've reached the end of today's session, but I want to thank you both, our experts, our guests, for sharing valuable insights, experiences. Obviously, all of your contributions is what makes these discussions really meaningful for the community. For everyone who's attended today, thank you for gifting us your time. Like I say, I know it is the largest currency we have to offer one another, so we appreciate you making time for this conversation, and hopefully you've gotten a little value out of it and you can go back to your organizations and apply some of what you've learned or challenge some of what you're doing today. But if you, by any means, need any help with coaching enablement, please check out Success Hacker, Success Coaching. Obviously, they're a wonderful resource for you all. And also share your feedback on today's session. So if you've got thoughts, was today wonderful? Let people know, tell your friends. We'd love to have them join in the next sessions coming, or obviously listen to the replay for anyone who wasn't available today. Now, we do have another event coming up, so mark your calendars. The next one on the calendar is for June 18th, and they'll be exploring building a culture of empathy and accountability in support. So let me leave you with this. Great customer focused individuals know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to find them. And that's why they created Success Coaching and Success Hacker. And this series. So have a great rest of your day, month. And again, Andrew will be back to pick the series back up next month in June. But thank you all again so much for your time today.